With new, gentler scented Clorox disinfecting wipes, clean finally smells as good as it feels. On everything from lamps to ceiling fans. Even on your kid's toy shark. Oh, ouch. Clorox disinfecting wipes. Now available in crisp lemon. Find it on Amazon. Clorox. Clean feels good.
Meet the computer you can talk to. With Copilot on Windows, working, creating, and collaborating is as easy as talking. Got writer's block? Share your screen with Copilot Vision to help spark inspiration, and use Copilot Voice to have a conversation and brainstorm ideas. Or maybe you need some tech help. With Copilot Vision, Copilot sees what you see. Let Copilot talk you through step-by-step guidance so you can master new apps, games, and skills faster. Try now at windows.com/Copilot.
To be a German at that time, you had to stand outside yourself and think, how am I looking? How am I coming across? Am I nodding enthusiastically enough? Am I saying the right things? Does my voice sound as if I really mean what I'm saying? And I think that sense of being for others and being for yourself is so sharp in Nazi Germany that it exceeds any social situation that we can sort of occasionally dip into where we're thinking in those terms. It's a lifestyle, and I think just how stressful that must be.
Welcome to the Spy Masters podcast. I'm your host, Antonia Senior. I'm a writer and journalist, and it's my mission to bring you all the best people writing about intelligence, fact and fiction, historical and contemporary. My guest this week is the best-selling novelist Simon Scarrow. Simon has written over 40 books, many of them set during the Roman Empire, and I've been a fan of his work for what feels like an entire epoch, so it's great to have him on the podcast. We're talking about his latest, A Death in Berlin. It's a thriller set in Nazi Germany, and it's a chilling and atmospheric story underpinned by copious research. We'll be talking a lot about what it means to be a good man living in a terrible regime. We've got some brilliant guests coming up on the Spy Masters podcast, so don't forget to follow us, review us, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, so we can keep bringing you the best writers on spies. And now I'll hand you over to me, talking to Simon Scarrow about A Death in Berlin. Simon, thank you so much for joining the Spy Masters podcast. We're delighted to have you on.
Thank you. Delighted to be here, or there, or virtually.
So it's a bit of a departure for me talking to you about this book, because I've been reviewing you for many years, but primarily in the context of your Roman novels. And this book, A Death in Berlin, the third of your novels set in Berlin, is a departure from those more familiar sandals and swords. Can you just talk to me a little bit about the genesis for the entire project, and then a little bit about this specific book within that context?
Okay, well, the idea came out of the blue, really, because I was at the Alderney Literary Festival some years ago. And, when you go to these places, you do a little digging around. And I found out that the only concentration camp on British soil during the Second World War was at Alderney. And it's such an amazing kind of setting in its own right. I mean, it's 3.5 miles long, 1.5 mile wide island, had thousands of these concentration camp people on the island, several hundred Germans and 20 odd civilians. And I thought, what an amazing setting for some sort of whodunit serial killer kind of story. So I did some research, and then it turned out that, if you were sent to Alderney during the Second World War, it was a punishment. So I thought any policeman that was sent out to Alderney would have to be there for some punishment reason. So what they've done in Berlin, that would have caused them to be punished and sent to Alderney. So then I had to start researching the police scene in Berlin. So I thought, this is just amazing. There's a sort of like a amazing series of crime novels set in Berlin that could be written here. So that's how the thing came up. The Alderney novel will be one of these, part of the series at some point, purely because I've done quite a lot of research on that already. And I also think it would be a cracking story. And the idea is basically to sort of follow the passage of the Second World War through the eyes of this criminal investigator as he's dealing with individual crimes along the way. Because I'm interested to imagine what it must have been like to be someone trying to fight for justice and fight for the rule of law in what is essentially a criminal gangster regime. So that's where the idea came from.
Absolutely. We're going to talk a lot, I think, about the idea of trying to be a good man in a bad regime. But let's talk about your hero and Horst Schenke. I'm terrible with German. Yeah. Schenke. This particular book. So this outing for him. Where do we start? What's happening?
Well, this one of the things that came out of the research was the fact that I'd kind of had this blasé assumption that because the Nazi regime was so sort of totalitarian, that things like criminals wouldn't really have much of a purchase in that kind of society. As it turns out, they were quite happy and they'd worked alongside criminals all the way through their early kind of years in the Weimar Republic and beyond. And while they were sort of quite happy to crack down on sort of prostitution, pickpockets, and all the rest of it, they weren't so keen to crack down on people who owned nightclubs and who were dealing in the black market, because rationing in Germany began long before the Second World War, because they were trying to stop foreign currency flooding out of the thing because they needed it to fund the arms race they were involved in. So they wanted these black market guys, to maintain, because Nazis like their luxuries. They like champagne, they like perfume, etc. They also like their entertainments. So, they like to go to nightclubs and so on. So all these things were allowed to thrive under the Nazis. And criminal gangs, who are running a lot of this, were still in action and still in business during the early years of the Second World War. I thought, well, this is really bizarre, and it'll be an interesting plot and topic for the third novel in the series, having done euthanasia and serial killer before. And there's plenty more good topics to do Nazi criminality and dealing with it across the rest of the series.
So it starts in a nightclub, and the owner of the nightclub and his girlfriend are enjoying the evening's entertainment. And then as they leave, they're picked up by an unfamiliar driver. There's a gruesome murder, which happens very early on the book, so I'm not giving any spoilers. And your hero, Horst Schenke, has to investigate the murder and also how it ties into, as you say, these fake Russian cards which are circulating around Berlin. There is a moment actually in the book where he himself says, is it a reasonable thing to be concerned with criminality when there's so much else going on in the wider world, when we're at war? You sense him veering into a moment of crisis, that does anything I do actually matter when stacked against the terrible universe in which I'm living? And I thought that was really interesting, but he kind of backs away that thought because I guess he has to find meaning in his own endeavours.
Well, that's the thing. I think in that kind of a context, you kind of exercise morality in the small ways that you can. This is why I think this is one of the things I think that's going to be quite interesting following this guy, is he will deal with things in front of him, and as long as he can sort of do it with clear conscience, that's fine. But inevitably he's going to come up against something that, for example, his relations with this Jewish woman, where it's going to very much challenge his professional obligations and his personal and private integrity. And I thought that's something that's going to be interesting to, if he survives the war. I mean, I don't have a story arc all planned out. I write each novel as it comes, because I think it's important to do it that way so that you get a sense of the contingency and the imminency of living under the Nazi regime. And there is no sort of plan for survival other than getting from it day by day. And I think one of the things that came out of the research I was quite shocked by was this, the Americans did quite a lot of analysis, as the SS actually. They had sort of intelligence gathering services and so on. And they were talking to psychologists who were saying that, people were beginning to sort of censor themselves in their dreams. They would be dreaming something. They reported that they were dreaming about something and realized it was veering into dangerous territory and somehow managed to sort of pull themselves back. If a totalitarian regime can get into your head that far, I think that's really quite frightening.
I thought that was one of my favourite things about the book, which I completely adored, by the way. But one of the things I loved about it most was that the atmosphere that you recreated of what it felt like to live within a totalitarian regime. And there's various bits where Horst himself kind of considers it. There's a lovely way, even on the first page, where you open it up and you say, I'm just going to quote you back to yourself. You talk about how there are two worlds, the stern, stiff, and of course patriotic reality of public life, and the secret inner world into which most people silently retreated from, where they regarded the gaudy pageant of the Third Reich at a remove. And I thought that was a brilliant way of looking at it, that idea that you had to retreat into your secret self and, watch on in bemusement.
Yeah, I mean, that's a frequent aspect. You hear it quite often in the sort of oral histories of the Third Reich, where they basically, it's very comfortable for us. I mean, most of the time we live just looking out of our eyes, we don't really think. But to be a German at that time, you had to stand outside yourself and think, how am I looking? How am I coming across? Am I nodding enthusiastically enough? Am I saying the right things? Does my voice sound as if I really mean what I'm saying? And I think that sense of being for others and being for yourself is so sharp in Nazi Germany that it exceeds any social situation that we can sort of occasionally dip into where we're thinking in those terms. It's a lifestyle, and I think just how stressful that must be.
Later on in the book, you refer to it as the way that the Third Reich has made everybody into an actor. So they have to act even in front of the people that they love. And as you said, with censoring their own dreams, I guess they have to act to themselves as well in a certain sense. So, part of the way that the regime, I guess, finds its authority is by making everybody into a kind of a liar and an actor, right? So it destabilizes everything. If you can't act sincerely, everything's off kilter.
Well, we're getting a very interesting sort of reverse in the United States, aren't we? With people who know things are a certain way. Like for yesterday, there was some hearing where one of the Democrats was trying to date as a Republican guy. So Russia invaded Ukraine, right? And the guy says, "Well, they drove tanks and armored cars and army people across the border. What do you call that?" And the guy's going, "Well, and you could, kind of reality that's coalescing around the kind of Trump regime." And I think it's very dark. As someone who has done quite a lot of historical research into the Nazis, and I'm not, one of these people going, "Oh, yeah, they're a bunch of Nazis." It is very clear that there are homologies and these kind of similarities in policy, in outlook, in action that are happening in America now, which are pretty much a carbon copy of what happened earlier. First thing Hitler does when he comes to power is to pardon 8,000, rioters, murderers, and other criminals who are party members that, being sent to prison for these crimes. What does Trump do? Then, 56 days into Hitler's regime, he opens up Dachau as the first sort of internment camp for people he doesn't like. It takes Trump 7 days to do something similar at Guantanamo. So he's moving at pace along a very familiar trajectory. And I think that's kind of what makes writing this book, very, very timely, but at the same time, incredibly bleak and worrying, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I felt that in two senses. So one that the idea of the sort of thuggishness of the state and the power for its own sake, and power as being the kind of dominant play compared to any other kind of potential human impulse. Like that parallel struck me very forcefully. And also the other parallel that struck me very forcefully, and also I guess a little worryingly, was this idea of having a secret inner world. Because I feel like as the world is becoming more destabilized and more worrying, I'm myself constantly retreating to what I consider to be safer ground to think about, i.e., in my case, at the moment, the early Cold War. But, it's one's own response that actually, in a frightening world, maybe the easiest thing to do is just close your eyes, right?
Yeah, I know. You see this to a kind of limited extent on social media, where, if you stick your head above the parapet, instantly, you are descended upon by all these people. And you begin to sort of think twice about making very cogent, well-reasoned points backed up by credible facts, because that's not how they're going to be received by people. And these people, get to the stage where they make death threats, and I've had a few, and you just got to think, this is nuts.
Really, you are quite robust on social media, I have to say. I have seen you being, and I applaud your bravery, because I'm very unrobust on social media, because I well, for lots of reasons, but you've had death threats as a result of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, they're obviously, some idiot statement by some incel in Omaha, who's been sent to bed early by his mum without any milk and cookies, who's making that sort of comment. But you never know. This is the trouble. And so, I mean, you will hear threats from people in Britain, the same sort of thing. They're being kind of egged on and encouraged by, the likes of Farage in his very tacit way, where he sort of says, yes, I need to pick up a rifle and encourage a revolution. And this is sort of thing we need. And we know that, push that sort of rhetoric far enough, and then MPs start dying. And, they're just the first. So it is a very, very worrying time. And Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much longer I'll be happy to put my head above the parapet. I suspect that, I mean, I'm reasonably safe here in Mauritius, but, when I come back to the UK to promote books and stuff, I'm very aware that I'll be in public and there will be exchanges of views, I'm sure, at certain events. But that's kind of where we are. What do? Do you sort of say the right thing, or do you just climb up and play safe? It's tricky.
So just to return to Horst, I mean, this is precisely the conundrum, but obviously slightly with higher stakes, perhaps, than our swithering about on that's exactly the type of conundrum he's facing. So early on in the book, there's pressure that's an echo of previous books for him to join get an SS rank within his position in the German police, and he's trying to resist it. So I'm fascinated by your portrayal of him as a good guy. Were you concerned that by creating a sympathetic and humanised person working within the apparatus of the Nazi state, that you were potentially feeding into an exculpatory narrative about it all?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, there's a very kind of complicated context here. So, within the German police, there is this sort of resistance to becoming part of the party and part of the party apparatus, part of the party security apparatus, because they regard themselves, particularly Kripo, the Criminal Investigation Division, as the professionals. We are the police, we are the elite of the police. Who are these dilettantes in these smart Hugo Boss uniforms telling us how to behave and so on? So, and there's part of your, exculpability, Hugo Boss, But a lot of police officers were trying to resist being drawn in too closely. Even Heinrich Müller, who headed the Gestapo, didn't join the party until 1940, when he was ordered to by Himmler. He just saw himself as very much a politician, a professional policeman. He wasn't a Nazi, but he certainly, identified with a lot of their policies. He just didn't see himself as fitting this. So there is a lot of that going on. But the other thing I'm interested in is seeing, I don't want to make him, Horst Schenke, too goody-goody. I want him to be, that person who the reader can identify with, who will then think, no, rather than blaming him or praising him, will think, well, how would I have reacted in that situation? And I think this is one of the horrible, insidious things about police states, is that, they define, you can say, right, I'm going to be a professional police officer and I will fight crime. The problem then becomes, what happens when the people in charge start redefining crime to be things like political difference, racial difference, all these kinds of things where incrementally the good, professional, moral person is led into a position where suddenly those things become much, much harder to maintain, because you're fighting against your professionalism, your duty, which you've sworn an oath, this is what you're going to do. And the goalposts have been steadily shifted by the regime that you're actually working for, And I think a lot of the people who started out, who ended up, for example, being parts of the Einsatzgruppen that carried out all the atrocities in police battalions on the Eastern Front, were led through that process. And so many of them just went along with it, and so few resisted it. And I think that's going to be a really interesting part of the story arc across the series.
Yeah, it's the sort of being in slow boiling water, right? When do you jump? And I guess in your research, because the other element of it, of course, is that people need to work and they need to protect their jobs and they need to protect their income and their families. And these things, tend to take priority over the wider questions of the state and its morality. One's own morality is kind of more personal than that. Did you find in your research any example of people in the police or whatever taking moral stands and suffering big consequences? Or was it overwhelmingly the case that they just sort of went along with whatever they were told?
No, I mean, you see it in the small details. There's an autobiography of a Jewish woman who survived in Berlin during the Second World War. And she recounts this incident where she got on a bus and she'd taken off her yellow star, and somebody had seen the stitching and said to this police officer, arrest her, she's a Jew, she shouldn't be on the public transport. And the police officer basically gave this person a thick ear and tossed them off the bus and said, you carry on to the end of your journey, love. Now, not everybody, this is one of the things, isn't it? This is what, about the contingency of morality. The different police officer in the same situation would have arrested her. But, you come across these kind of weird moments all through the research where the people you least expect to do the right thing do the right thing, and the people who have no excuse for doing the wrong thing still do it anyway. And I think, there's a lot of that in Nazi Germany. By and large, that the balance of opinion is, I think, a good 33% of the people sort of went along with it, absolutely hook, line and sinker. 33%, kept quiet, and 33% were the enemy, and they were kind of badgered, bludgeoned, and all the rest of it. It's like Werner Herzog said a few years ago, when I think Trump got elected the first time, that now America discovered what we discovered in Germany long ago, that a third of the population are quite happy to kill another third of the population while a third do nothing. And that's kind of how it is.
At one point, Horst is, I'm going to quote you back to yourself again, Horst is thinking to himself, and he says, however he might defend his role, the truth was that he was a cog in the same machine that had stripped Jews not only of their citizenship, but their humanity as well. Yet what could a single cog do to break the engine? Horst has some some people that he works with who are all, again, facing the similar sorts of dilemmas. So he's got a sort of robust sergeant who has a family, and I think he's going to be quite interesting to watch. And then there's a very interesting character who is he's come across from the Gestapo because he has an annoying habit of speaking the truth and not understanding when he's
Nazi.
Yeah, I think really fascinating. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? I found that the idea of having, so this character is clearly kind of on the autistic spectrum. That's how he presents, but he is incapable temperamentally of telling the lies necessary to operate within a regime like this. And I thought that was such a brilliant idea to have a character like that in there.
The Who's down in Who Newville were making their list, but some didn't know Walmart has the best brands for their gifts.
What about toys? Do they have brands kids have been wanting all year?
Yep, Barbie, Tony's, and Lego. Gifts that will make them all cheer.
Do you mean they have all the brands I adore?
They have Nintendo, Nespresso, Apple, and more.
What about...
So the Who answered questions from friends till they were blue. Each one listened and shouted, from Walmart? Who knew? Shop gifts from top brands for everyone on your list in the Walmart app.
Oh, Hilton stay, your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. Enjoy comfortable rooms and friendly service when you stay with Hilton instead. Save up to 25% this season when you book with Hilton. Hilton for the stay. Terms apply.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't intend him to be there. I mean, this is why I like writing each book on the fly, because you don't know kind of how it's going to have a half side of A4 as the synopsis, and then just go into it and see what happens. So he just popped up as somebody who's going to be the middleman between the Gestapo and the Kripo on this first investigation. But these characters kind of write themselves in, and if there are recurring characters in the series, they get to become more and more real. And I think, one of the delights has been getting to know Leibniz better each time, I get sit down to write the book. So, he's not just some sort of where's his nice little shiny leather coat and his black hat and all the rest of it? So he has all the iconography of the Gestapo and is kind of instantly recognizable as such. But at the same time, as you say, he is on the spectrum. And, part of the problem of being on the spectrum is quite often that you are compulsively honest. And it's not going to get you very far in an organization like the Gestapo, which is why he's going to be stuck at Scharführer probably for his career, because he's never going to see the right thing to get promoted. But at the same time, of course, he's a valuable asset because he's a pin-sharp mind, he knows how to shoot well and all these other attributes. So, he's a very much a kind of dual character as the Nazi functionary, at the same time, someone still interested in the truth.
Yeah, and it's really clever. But one thing I found, there's a moment in this book where he needs to requisition a car to get somebody to the hospital quickly, and the car driver says no way. And then he just basically sort of indicates his Gestapo outfit, and the driver immediately quails and brings the woman into the car. And I found that a little bit kind of, I guess, almost disturbing because it was so unconscious. It was sort of like this moment where he used the trappings of horrible organisation for which he worked when it was useful to him. It was a moment of kind of remembering that actually, although he's a sympathetic character, he's also part of something unsympathetic.
Yeah. And it's also kind of, as you say, that unconscious gesture that you are so sort of steeped in the values of the organisation you're a part of, that you know pragmatically, without any kind of moral intention at all, that simply tapping the uniform, as it were, is enough to get the thing that you need done.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it was sort of it was a kind of like a moment where I was kind of brought up short. The other moment where I was brought up short was a longer moment. It's a big set piece you have in the book. I want to talk to you about it specifically. Is a party at which your hero Horst meets a number of extraordinary Nazi bigwigs, including the big man, the Fuhrer himself. And I wanted to talk to you about that. The first thing I wanted to ask is obviously the setting for this party is his new chief's house in an affluent suburb of Berlin, but the suburb is Wannsee. I'm not sure I'm saying it right. It's famous for other reasons, and I was assuming that was very deliberate on your part. Was it?
Well, for sure, because Wannsee, there wasn't just one house on Wannsee. Wannsee is sort of playground of the rich and the corrupt in Nazi Germany at the time. And everybody, if you wanted to get on in the party, then you needed a house on Wannsee in order to have your social functions and be neighbours with, people who have power. Case in point would be Canaris. Heydrich made a very, very shrewd move in getting a house next door to Admiral Canaris. And they used to come around and play the violin, and whilst Heydrich's Canaris's wife played the piano. So they had these lovely musical evenings, even though one kind of suspected the other one wasn't playing for Nazi Germany. So this is the sort of thing that goes on. But yeah, I wanted, you can't, this is like a lot of these things, you can't help tell a story, and then there'll be a place like Wannsee, which everybody knows, even though this hasn't happened yet, this conference, that's decided the fate of the Jews. So Wannsee at this stage is kind of just an innocent Nazi upper echelons playground. It hasn't sort of assumed that kind of sinister overtone as a result of that conference. So, and I guess, this is one of the sort of pleasures, if you like, of this kind of novel, is that we know, the reader knows these things. The reader knows where this is all going. And what I'm trying to create is that sense of, living in the moment before people know this sort of stuff happens, so that the reader can have this kind of ironic distance from what's going on, but at the same time sort of think, okay, well, what would it be like if I was there and I didn't know what was going to happen? So I think that's kind of one of the extra things that particular scene delivers.
Absolutely. And I thought that was really clever. And that tension is really clear throughout the book. The tension between what we know and what Horst knows is palpable. And you watch him making the decisions, and, they're decisions that maybe he wouldn't make with hindsight, but only with hindsight. And I think it's really good. I actually found it really interesting because I've recently made a move to writing nonfiction from having written historical fiction. And I found that coming to the nonfiction with a kind of historical fiction mindset, which says that people are living in the present when you're writing about them, was actually incredibly useful, because I think maybe sometimes the historians are so busy looking for patterns that they forget that people are making decisions in a very frightening, destabilizing present, and they don't have.
Yeah. No, well, that's the key thing, isn't it? The historian perspective, there has this huge kind of advantage and easy temptation to make judgments on people who are, as you say, living through things as they're happening without, living day to day, moment to moment, and not being aware of what's going on. They may be aware of a sort of a broad drift. I think before the First World War, people were quite aware that that's the direction of travel. And that, as we are aware now, there is something very, very dark around the corner of the age we're living in at the present. I mean, it's not just kind of, global warming, which is the big one, but it's more contingent than that. Keir Starmer's about to go off to America tomorrow to talk to Trump. What must be going through his mind? He's aware of all this going. He's not quite sure how this meeting's going to go. Historians, of course, going to say, well, if Billy Starmer had said this at such and such a time. But, he's going to be the man on the spot as it unfolds. Right. He's not going to be, as you say, when these guys comfortably sitting, working out the grand narrative explanation for why things turned to shit in 2025. in 10 years' time, or 30 years' time, or so on. So I think, that's one of the beauties of writing historical fiction is you can take people back to that moment of doubt, take people, get inside the skins of those people who lived through a moment without any kind of precise understanding of how it would turn out.
Absolutely. At this party, I don't think it's too much for spoiler to say that, because it doesn't affect the wider kind of plot. I don't think it's too much for spoiler to say that Schenke meets Hitler. And I wanted to talk to you about writing Hitler, because that's quite a thing. Did you have to talk to yourself about whether that was a thing that you wanted to do, or did it fit naturally?
No, I mean, one of the things, from the research, one of the things you get is the fact that Hitler was a big motor racing nut, just like Mussolini. When he came to power, he piled lots and lots of money into subsidising the Silver Arrows racing team, for example.
We should just mention to the readers who are starting here that your hero is a former racing driver, which is why he's not shipping out to the front. He's staying in Berlin because he had a big crash that injured him. But he was a very famous racing driver before
in the previous life. So and of course, that has a kind of rock star status. You may stick on the hat and try, and it may be a few years later, but inevitably you're going to be recognised by people. And of course, Hitler's a nut. So suddenly, I was thinking about, okay, so he meets Hitler at this party. Hitler's going to be a fanboy. He's going to slip into that fanboy riff when he goes, "You're Horst Schenke." And so, and he's sort of going, but you're the Führer. So it was quite an interesting one to write. To at the same time, it's not about humanizing him. It's about kind of revealing, it's a kind of setting out another aspect of his personality, which it's kind of, there's a horrible tendency in fiction and cinema. Hitler, the starch twiddling villain, the sort of thing. But he's a lot more than that. And I think I wanted to give a sort of sense that, we so often demonize these people, yet, quite often they will have attributes that a lot of people share. And in other circumstances, they're going, "Oh, yeah, that Hitler, what a great guy. He loves motor racing," So I wanted to sort of get that sort of sense of it.
Creating, labeling him as a sort of demonic, evil figure just misses everything anyway, doesn't it? Because then it implies that somehow he's an aberration and not a potentially recurring phenomenon.
Funny that. No.
Yeah, and there was a lovely moment there. I thought I really liked this. It was the sort of detail that I thought was so good. That Hitler sort of brings him into the party, and Hitler's got his arm around him. And then everybody gives the Heil Hitler salute, and Horst just realizes he can't give the salute because he's cuddling Hitler. And I thought it was brilliant because it was just that sort of surreal awkwardness of being in the presence of this character who is dominating the world in which you're living in, and how you respond to that as a human is actually your kind of awkwardness. The physicality of it I thought was brilliant. Really extraordinary.
Well, it's like the physicality. I don't know if you saw the Macron-Trump meeting the other day.
Yeah.
It's hysterical.
It was quite funny.
So, yeah.
Yeah, the physicality.
I think that's something that's, we think about, again, the historians say, oh, yes, Macron met Trump and they had this meeting. But the reality is when you're looking at the video footage, it is so personal and so kind of two guys, one completely outmatched by the other. And did you see the bit where he leaned over and touched his arm and said, "No, actually, the truth is this." As a historian, how do you kind of do that? As a fiction writer, you can get into both their heads, and that becomes a really, really interesting scene.
Very powerful. But one of the things that I really liked about your the way you talk about Hitler as well is, so the book, obviously, the main plot is concerned with the criminal undergrounds in Germany and in Berlin, and then you describe him as the kind of the arch thug. Hitler is the greatest criminal of them all, you say, and I like the idea of the parallel between your main plot and the kind of bigger sense that Germany itself is running a racket with him at the top.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, throughout Hitler's rise to power, there are plenty of moments where he, takes people aside and threatens them with a gun, and scenes like that. So we know that all that stuff exists, and he had absolutely no compunction about Night of the Long Knives, getting rid of Rome and his SA chiefs in the most brutal fashion and extra legal. And it's a gangland hit. That's kind of what it was. There was these two rival gangs, the SS and the SA, and the SS and Hitler sort of decide, okay, well, you have to get rid of the SA, and it's just like The Godfather. That turn up early morning, burst in, shoot people, take them away, and the bodies are disposed of. And that's kind of how it worked.
I thought it worked really well, having those sort of that kind of sense of the two parallel things. So if you're trying to be the guardian of the law, but actually you're compromised by the fact that you're just representing yet another thug, I think that was really interesting. And it's going to be fascinating, as you say, to watch how the series unfolds. Can you tell us anything, or is it too soon? You're very prolific, Simon. You've written about 50 books.
Well, the 40 anyway. Well, yeah, because, I tend to write one way or another about 2.5, 3 books a year. Because I'm 62, so I'm very conscious of the fact that time's against me now, and I have this big stack of ideas building up on the thing, and I've got to get really busy to get them going. And the other thing, of course, and I'm sure you understand this just as much as me, is you live to write, really, and if you didn't, you go insane. And it's what keeps you on the straight and narrow, is that the research, thinking about projects, and then getting stuck into something, and then you're and that's when I'm at my happiest. Is when I'm sitting there and the story's unfolding and I'm writing. My wife knows, when I'm editing or I'm between books, because that's a fucking misery,
Yes, I hear you very much. Yeah, the fun bit's the writing. It's all the other stuff that's really annoying, like doing podcasts. Yeah. It's fun.
Well, that's the thing. You see, this is when you're writing, you're sitting. It's you and the word processor, and that's it for quite a lot of the year. Same with the research. And somebody asked me this question about, what do you get out of doing the festivals and the podcasts and the rest of it? It's talking to people and meeting people, because, and usually, because of the context and everything, it's people who are interested in history and, like to think about what's going on in the world. So, it's always a huge pleasure to do podcasts and literary festivals and things like that. So you're not taking me away from anything. This is part of the bonus of the job.
Good. In that case, I'll take that. Well, listen, on that note, Simon, I think we'll draw to a close. And I just want to say thank you so much. And I cannot wait to see how it all unfolds and what poor Horst does as things get even more grim.
Yeah, it's not going to be great fun for him, is it? But many thanks for inviting me on. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow, tweet, spread the word, so that we can keep bringing you more brilliant writers talking about spies. Don't miss an episode of the Spy Masters podcast.